I want to give you two pieces of advice right now. You are so proud of that young man, and he's everything that there is. As he grows and becomes a young man and then an adult, your pride doesn't end. I still have the kind of pride in mine who just sang that. And I thank you. Being objective is not one of my strong points. One of the cool things that they're going to do as parents is they're going to get to teach minor all sorts of things that have been taught since the oldest ones of you had children, and you taught your children, and then you taught your grandchildren, and now Betty gets to teach a great-grandchild. You know, funny songs. Funny songs, Little Bunny, hopping through the forest. Yeah, that kind of song. You get to teach them about Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall. Now, Amy told me that I'm supposed to preach a truncated sermon this morning, and Amy and I are going back and forth about words, and we had a big discussion last week about a word I used in the message that she mispronounces and tried to tell me she was right. I'm not even sure what truncated means. So, if this sermon is truncated, I did it just for you. But, you know, they're going to have fun reading to that baby. They're going to have fun telling stories to that young man. They're going to have fun saying prayers with him. And each one of us, you know, we remember that. And today I want you to remember back, if you can, to the story of Cinderella. How many of y'all remember the story of Cinderella? You know, she was the girl who found herself in horrible, horrible circumstances. She was unloved. She was abused. She was not with people who cared about her, and yet those people she was with were supposed to be the ones that cared about her the most. But with the help of some friends, Cinderella overcame all the hurdles, and she found her Prince Charming. And at the end of the story of Cinderella, we find her living happily ever after. She's on top of the mountain, reveling, just having a big time in the glory of her new and transformed life. Well, the Disney people are pretty smart. And a number of years ago, they made a movie that was somewhat of a sequel to Cinderella. The name of that movie was Dreams Come True. Some of you may have seen it. Some of you may know the movie. I'm certainly not familiar with it, but I found this wonderful illustration that goes with where I want us to be this morning. And in this movie, Cinderella goes off with Prince Charming, and she goes and she becomes all that she wanted to be. But living happily ever after didn't quite happen the way that she thought it would be. You know, she finds out what it's like to live in the everyday work of running a castle. You know, it's just kind of mundane pedestrian work running a castle. She has to be hostess to all of the visitors who come, and she has to be royal. And say correct for me, John. Correct.
Correct.
Correct. She has to be correct. And she has to be what all of the people in her new world expect her to be. And unfortunately, in her efforts to be correct as she entertained and everything, she found herself becoming more and more unhappy because she couldn't be herself. She had to act like something different. And by the end of the movie, Cinderella discovers that she has to be herself to succeed. She has to be who she is. She can't be what other people expect her to be. Well, a couple of weeks ago, if you'll remember with me, we were in the first part of Luke chapter 9, and Jesus and James and John and Peter went up the Mount of Transfiguration. And there on that high mountain, Jesus is transfigured before their very eyes. And about 8 days before this happened, Luke tells us, Jesus told his disciples for the first time that he was going to have to suffer. and that he was going to die at the hands of the people who would reject him. Think about how those disciples must have felt when they heard him say, I'm on my way to death. I'm going to suffer. I have to die. Yet on this day when the disciples and Jesus went up the mountain and they witnessed Jesus and his glorification, the disciples must have thought in their heads, knowing that he said he was on his way to die, but if he's here with Moses and with Elijah, surely God will do something miraculous, and then Jesus won't have to die, and God just won't let his chosen one die on a cross. Right? That would have gone through my mind. It's no wonder that Peter, when he saw Jesus up there in his face flaming white, with Moses and Elijah, remember what Peter wanted to do? He wanted to build 3 huts, permanent structures in that area, in which Jesus and Moses and Elijah, they could dwell. They would stay there on that mountaintop, there in the presence of the holy, there where no one could harm Jesus. However, that's not the way it was to be. Jesus had his moment of glory. He had his 30 minutes of fame. And, you know, then he had to get back to real life. And what the disciples saw is not what real life was for Jesus. Jesus had to return to the real world, just like Cinderella needed to. He had to return to the world which needed what he brought to the real world. And what Jesus brought was God's mercy and God's grace and God's love. That's what Jesus needed to do. So he went back down the mountain to the crowds, to the dis-ease, to the oppression. And Jesus had to go back to hatred and to rejection that would eventually send him to the cross. Now that was our story from 2 weeks ago. In the second half of this passage, and it doesn't really seem to fit, we see something far, far more real than that 30 minutes of fame that Jesus enjoyed up on the Mount of Transfiguration with Moses and Elijah. Listen, as Luke continues the story of Jesus and what went on. I'm in Luke chapter 9, verse 37. On the next day when they had come down from the mountain, a great crowd met them. Just then a man from the crowd shouted, "Teacher, I beg you to look at my son. He is my only child." Suddenly a spirit is seizing him, and all at once he shrieks. It convulses him until he foams at the mouth. It mauls him and will scarcely leave him. I begged your disciples to cast it out, but they could not. Jesus answered, "You faithless and perverse generation, how much longer must I be with you and bear with you? Bring your son here." And while the boy was coming, the demon dashed him to the ground in convulsions. But Jesus rebuked the unclean spirit. He healed the boy, and he gave him back to his father. And all were astounded at the greatness of God. Have you ever been astounded at the greatness of God? I've got a friend who taught me a term a long time ago that has to do with being astounded at the greatness of God. And that term is awe time. When do we have time that we're with God that we are struck in awe of the greatness of God? We are struck by his ability to use us as vessels. And my question to you today is, what does this have to do with us? How does this affect us on the second Sunday of Lent? Does this scripture show anything to us or tell anything to us as we are in a period of soul searching? A period of trying to figure out what we can do better. A period when we are into inner cleansing. I think it does speak to us. We need to get past the past. We need to get past what is it I can give up for Lent that'll make me a better person. Now, personally, I gave up boiled over. I don't know what any of you all gave up, but I'm sure that it was something very valuable and is going to help you be a better person. But we need to get past what it is we can give up and maybe move on just a little way and change one little word and say it's not what we can give up for Lent, but maybe say, what can we give out? What can we give out for Lent? Jesus was up on the Mount of Transfiguration. Jesus, without the two hard-hitting dudes, Moses and Elijah, and Jesus left the princes, those two dudes. Jesus left the safety of the mountain and the safety of being with God to come back down. Why would he do that? Why would he do that? So he could continue to teach. Jesus had a mission. Jesus had a job to do. So he could continue to teach and to preach and to heal and be himself. Like Cinderella discovered she had to be herself to be happy, Jesus had to be himself. It wasn't time for him to be on the mountain yet. It wasn't time for him to be with Moses and Elijah. Jesus had to be down with the folks, with you and me, doing what he was doing so people would know about God. Jesus was there to give out the love of God. He gave up being on the mount so that he could give out the love of God. And throughout his ministry, what did Jesus do? In so many different ways. He healed, he did miracles, he raised from the dead. Anything you want, Jesus did to show people, A, that he was the Son of God, but more importantly than that, Jesus did everything he did to show us, show them the love of God. And the final act of his giving up so that he could give out was he gave up his life on the cross. God gave up his Son on the cross so he could give to us and all of the world salvation. And in that act, he gives to all of eternity, all of creation who believes, he gives to them and to us eternal life. John and Kelly, over the last 6 months, I suspect, have learned a little bit about giving up, haven't you? Mainly sleep. But, you know, we give up. What do we sacrifice for our children? What do we give up? The things that we want to do for those around us that we care about. And how wide do we allow that circle of those we are willing to sacrifice for? How wide will we allow that circle to become? Is it just folks that look like us, that speak our language, that pretty much fit in? Or will we allow that circle to be folks that are different, that don't speak our language, that come from a different culture, and yet we know they are God's children? And we know beyond any shadow of a doubt that when Jesus went to that cross, when Jesus died, and when Jesus rose again, he didn't just die for 47 people here at the corner of Peabody and McLean. He did it for a world that's universal. All you got to do is say, I accept. I believe. He gave up his life to give out the love. Now, Jesus couldn't stay on the mountain.